Undertale and Celeste are two of the most beloved indie games of all time. Celeste is renowned for its intensive platforming and fluid mechanics, while Undertale's choose-your-own-path adventure is filled with witty dialogue, lovable characters, and intense boss fights. But what do these games have in common? Why exactly is it that these indie games have such a mass following? Before we talk about what makes these games so special, we first have to go over procedural rhetoric. Rhetoric is loosely defined as the art of persuasion, first being used in Greece around 600 BC. You've likely heard of ethos, pathos, and logos, the three core principles of ancient rhetoric that are still widely used today. This is just one form of rhetoric, a way of persuading people. Procedural rhetoric, however, was coined by Ian Bogost in 2007. It is a subset of digital rhetoric, any form of rhetoric that takes place digitally through your screen. He defines procedural rhetoric as the practice of authoring arguments through processes. By processes, he essentially means the rules of the game, the macro aspects of it. To get an initial idea of how this works, in his work he cites Animal Crossing and its trading system as a comparison to the real world's economics. For example, he states, "In real life, when we pay our mortgage bill, we don't see where that money ends up. But in Animal Crossing, the player experiences the way his debt makes bankers wealthy. After a player makes a major payment to his mortgage, Tom Nook closes his shop and upgrades it." In this way, he emphasizes how in-game mechanics cause the player to feel a certain way about real life. But I'm less interested in what a game's mechanics state about the real world. I'm more interested in how these procedures bolster the game's themes, how it persuades the audience to take its message to heart, and why these core themes resonate with so many people. Let's first take a look at Celeste. You control Madeline, the female protagonist of the game. Her journey's quite simple. She wants to reach the peak of Mount Celeste. The controls are simple on the outside as well. You can walk around, climb up walls, and dash once, a mystical power granted to you by the mountain. It is a two-dimensional platformer, with the goal being to progress to the end of the level. Each level is broken up through screens of various sizes. Each screen represents a checkpoint, so that if you fail, you only have to start from the beginning of the screen. Thematically, the game is a journey of both acceptance and persistence. Madeline must learn to accept herself, as what she perceives as her flaws physically manifest into an evil version of herself, aptly named Madeline. She is determined to climb Celeste Mountain, both physically climbing the mountain and mentally climbing her own mountains in doing so. Overall, Celeste is a game that is about finding yourself and showing you that your full potential was inside of you all along. Analyzing a procedural aspect of the game, the controls are one way it demonstrates this. It teaches you various techniques throughout the game, mostly based off the initial dash skill, which simply launches you in a certain direction. These techniques include hyperdashing, wave dashing, wall bouncing, and more. A lot of these are very difficult techniques, steepening the learning curve as you progress through the game. However, it is very important to note that these are not unlocked abilities. Madeline has full access to all these techniques from the very first level, reinforcing the fact that she has what it takes to climb the mountain from the very beginning, not granted to her through various power-ups like a traditional video game. Another procedural aspect that seeps into the game's theme is the fact that levels are broken up into screens. The fact that these screens act as checkpoints encourages players to keep trying, one battle at a time. Usually, each screen is a short series of platforming, so it is relatively forgiving if you mess up. One must continuously try and try again in order to reach the end of the screen, upon which a new challenge presents itself. This mirrors Madeline's daily struggles, how she struggles to accept herself and pursue her goals. This ties into one of the game's themes, that persistence is key. Now, we know that Celeste is a digital game, and the digital medium is made out of multiple sensory experiences. Casey Boyle's The Digital, Rhetoric Behind and Beyond the Screen, states that some of the most innovative developments have been those that have taken account of its multisensory affordances. So in Celeste, we have the visual aspect, what is physically happening on the screen, the auditory aspect, which is the game's soundtrack and other sound effects, and the haptic elements of the game, which would be the physical control scheme that the player uses. Aside from these multisensory aspects, we must also analyze the procedural aspects that Bogost emphasizes, the previously discussed rules of the game. In conjunction with one another, both rhetorical theories work together in persuading the player to heed its theme. Madeline's struggle with Madeline is heavily reinforced through both procedural and multisensory means. At first, she tries to reject Madeline, leading to her journey being brought back to its start. There are many aspects to dissect of this clip that allows the players to resonate with Madeline. Visually, the background gets increasingly more cursed with the scarlet tendrils that emanate with Madeline's influence. Auditorily, the music scales as the conflict between Madeline and her evil counterpart escalate. As for the procedural side of things, the player cannot physically control Madeline during the cutscene. We also see the text boxes used to influence the narrative, as Madeline literally crawls out of her portrait to antagonize the player. All of these aspects are used to immerse the player into feeling that they are not in control. As Madeline struggles with her anxiety and refuses to accept herself the way she is, the player experiences all of these aspects of digital rhetoric. The multisensory experience, in combination with the procedural facet, all lead up to the current cutscene's feel of hopelessness. These sort of rhetorical tools are present all throughout the game. The soundtrack is dynamic, changing as you traverse through the level to make you feel some sort of way. Visually, the game is stunning, of course, but often the settings of the level are mirrored by the level's theme. For example, during the peak of Madeline's anxiety, we traverse through the Mirror Temple, which eerily has alien eyeballs on the foreground, causing a general uneasiness. Overall, these aspects help immerse players into Celeste's captivating story and work together to sell the game's theme of persistence and acceptance. Now, how do these digital rhetorical aspects work together to grab the player's attention in Undertale? Undertale is a spin on the RPG genre. It is quite literally advertised as the RPG game where you don't have to destroy anyone. The player controls Frisk, a child fallen into the underground, who attempts to make their way back to the surface. The method of doing so is entirely in the player's hands. You can make friends with every character to support your journey, or you can kill everyone who crosses your path, or a combination of both. More so than Celeste, Undertale heavily incorporates the procedural rhetorical style of persuasion. The RPG genre is usually one to incentivize slaying countless enemies in order to become stronger. For example, Pokemon does nothing to stop players from knocking out endless Pokemon to gain more levels and progress through the game faster. However, Undertale creator Toby Fox thought differently. In fact, he explicitly states in an interview that he sought out to tell a story that utilizes the medium as a storytelling device, instead of having the story and gameplay abstractions be completely separate. This is quite literally the textbook definition of procedural rhetoric. The entire game is centralized around whether you as the player should spare or kill each character. Take the example of the game's first boss fight. Toriel is one of the first monsters that you run into. She is a motherly figure who wants to protect you from the dangers of the underground. The player's desire to leave the underground leads to a conflict, in which some may choose to slay Toriel. The game makes you feel badly about this, to where some may think, maybe I should have spared her. So without saving the game, they exit and try again, this time with the intention of sparing her. However, they are greeted with this dialogue after doing so. Here, Undertale breaks the confines of traditional games, where restarting after not saving should leave you with no progress gained. However, the game remembers what you did, even after restarting, forcing the player to think wisely about their actions, setting the tone for the rest of the game. In Celeste, some of our previously discussed procedures are not deliberately created for the sake of persuading the player to heed the game's theme. For example, the fact that each level is broken up into screens reinforces the theme of the game is probably not intentional. Undertale, however, masterfully uses every single possibility for gameplay elements to reflect its theme. Compared to Celeste, Undertale's use of procedural rhetoric is much more intentional. Simon Ferrari argues that certain game mechanics have order to them, to where not every single macro decision is intended to make a statement. He gives the example of Halo, stating, although it may seem strange for avatars in a Halo game to be able to vault twice their height in relatively slow motion, these values are calculated and tuned for optimizing the combat experience, rather than formulating an alternate theory of gravity. Undertale's rhetoric has not gone unnoticed. Many scholarly works have been written about it, one in particular being Frederick Seraphine's Ethics at Play in Undertale. The paper argues many of the same aspects I've argued: the question of morality, how the game continuously warns the player against playing the game like a traditional RPG. Seraphine states, Undertale is a wonderful game where your actions and choices matter. It makes you think about your choices and actions in life. However, one aspect that is not discussed is the multisensory aspect of digital rhetoric, particularly the auditory aspect. A large part of Undertale is its masterfully created music, which always reinforces the current motif. For example, Undyne's fast-paced fanfare mirrors the character's determination. However, if the player chooses to go the genocide route, one where they purposely kill every single monster, they are deprived of any music happening at all. The player must then play through the remainder of the area with the eerie ambient noise, rather than the game's normally uplifting soundtrack. Every step of the way, Undertale forces you to reconsider your actions, even though they are in a digital environment. Seraphine concludes this argument best. Undertale is designed to evoke the question of pacifism within its players' hearts and shake their moral stances. It does so by offering them the means to explore both the brightest and the darkest corners of their souls. It strips down the genre of Japanese RPGs and exposes its moral contradictions, but it also attempts to push the players to introspect their own moral stances by shattering any form of moral compass. Overall, both Celeste and Undertale are masterclasses on how to properly sell a game's theme and truly resonate with a player. Celeste specializes in its multisensory rhetoric, with its message resonating with many. Undertale has become one of the best-selling games of all time, largely due to the groundbreaking way the fundamental rules of the game impact the player's real-life moral compass. These indie games show that you may not need a gigantic development team to create an incredible game. In fact, maybe these AAA devs could stand to learn a thing or two about procedural rhetoric.